The forgotten galaxy. The galaxy had grown quiet since the day humanity was declared extinct. To the younger races who had never seen a human with their own eyes, the stories seemed like little more than myths told by old soldiers to frighten cadets. They spoke of humans as destroyers, builders, and survivors who thrived where no other species dared to live. The archives of the Galactic Council described their wars, their inventions, and their refusal to surrender even when entire fleets stood against them. Yet after centuries of silence and no confirmed sightings, the Council confidently placed humanity in the category of extinction. In time, the galaxy adapted to life without them. Worlds once wary of human expansion flourished under the assumption that Earth and its people were gone forever. Academies taught about human ferocity with the same detached curiosity as they did about ancient predators now found only in fossils. To most, it was comfortable to believe humanity had vanished, for the thought of them returning unsettled even the bravest minds. On the far edges of Council territory, a quiet planet spun unnoticed. It was a dull world at first glance, its surface covered with barren mountains and deep valleys with little sign of life. Yet it was here that a mining consortium had established operations, drilling into the planet's crust to extract minerals for shipbuilding. At first, everything seemed routine. Cargo haulers came and went. Drilling machines carved into the rock and workers performed their duties with little excitement. But then the tremors began. At first, they were dismissed as natural earthquakes, the result of the planet's unstable crust. Instruments recorded the shakes. Warning alarms sounded, but nothing was thought unusual. Planets quaked all the time. The miners worked on with little fear. Then the tremors grew stronger. Equipment toppled. Drill shafts collapsed. One by one, workers reported strange patterns in the shaking. They claimed the vibrations were too steady, too deliberate, like a heartbeat beneath the ground. Supervisors silenced the complaints, blaming paranoia, yet the unease spread among the crews. Rumors whispered that something alive moved beneath the surface, something ancient and buried deep. Reports reached the consortium headquarters. Scientists were dispatched. They arrived with scanners and confident words, assuring all that there was nothing to fear. They explained it away as tectonic plates shifting against one another, but when the scanners probed deeper, readings came back with irregularities they could not explain. Geometric shapes buried miles underground, caverns that did not look natural, metallic structures where none should exist. The scientists exchanged worried glances but kept their official statements calm. Whatever was beneath the surface was not part of nature. The Galactic Council soon received word. At first, they showed little interest. Dozens of worlds had strange ruins left behind by forgotten civilizations. The discovery of another would hardly shake them, yet when one of the miners, desperate and terrified, sent an unauthorized transmission claiming that the planet itself was waking, the story spread faster than officials could contain it. The words human and extinct began to appear together in the same conversations. Academics scoffed, military officers laughed, and council members rolled their eyes. Yet not one of them could completely erase the old fear from their hearts. Because in every archive, in every history book, the same warning was written. If humans ever returned, the galaxy would tremble. Back on the planet, the ground shook again. Stronger this time. Workers fled their stations. Entire mining rigs fell into the earth as the soil cracked open. From the dark chasms came a sound no machine could explain, a low groaning noise that seemed to echo with intent. The scanners failed as if something blocked them from looking deeper. The scientists, who once mocked the idea of anything dangerous, now stood pale and silent. Something was stirring beneath the crust, and it was no natural force. The Council fleets were contacted at once. Warships set course for the world, their commanders expecting little more than a minor disturbance to silence. But within the shadows of the planet's valleys, the ground continued to tremble like a warning drumbeat. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy whispered the word it had buried: humans, the shaking ground. The tremors did not stop after the first wave of collapses. They grew worse with each passing day. Entire mountainsides cracked apart as if something deep beneath the crust was forcing its way upward. Miners abandoned their stations, refusing to return even under the threat of punishment. Supervisors sent panicked requests for assistance, their voices trembling as they described the strange regularity of the vibrations. They were not random. They pulsed with a rhythm that echoed through the stone, as if some great machine or colossal beast was waking after a long slumber. The ground was not simply moving, it was alive with purpose. When the first warships arrived, their captains laughed at the fear that had taken hold of the miners. From orbit, the planet looked calm, its barren mountains silent and its valleys empty. But the scanners confirmed what the miners had claimed. Something vast lay beneath the surface. At first, the readings were dismissed as anomalies caused by mineral interference, but the patterns were too precise to ignore. Perfect lines, metallic shapes buried deep under the rock, caverns arranged in formation. Nothing about them appeared natural. The captains transmitted their findings back to the Galactic Council, their once confident voices now uncertain. The council gathered in emergency session. Most spoke with arrogance, calling the reports exaggerations. They said no force could have hidden from the galaxy for so long. If humans had survived, surely they would have been discovered long before now. Yet the whispers spread quickly across the chamber. Some of the oldest members remembered firsthand the wars against humanity. They recalled fleets burning, worlds falling, soldiers breaking under the unrelenting will of human armies. To them, the tremors were not merely geological. They were warnings. The ground was shaking with the weight of history returning. Back on the surface of the planet, the scientists pressed forward with their investigation. They lowered equipment into the fissures left by the quakes. Cameras descended into the darkness and revealed structures that made no sense. Walls of smooth metal rose where there should have been stone. Doorways stood sealed beneath tons of earth. Strange symbols were carved into the surfaces, symbols that none of the alien linguists could decipher, but which carried an undeniable weight of design. It was not the ruin of some forgotten race. It was purposeful. It was human. The discovery sent shockwaves through the crews. Panic spread among the miners, who now refused to remain anywhere near the planet. Many tried to flee in stolen shuttles, and some succeeded, carrying with them wild stories of the dead rising. The council tried to silence the rumors, but it was too late. Across dozens of worlds, civilians began to speak of humans returning. Merchants tightened their roots, soldiers sharpened their blades, and leaders who once mocked the old warnings now found themselves unable to sleep. The galaxy had been built on the comfort of human absence. Now that comfort was crumbling like the surface of the quaking planet. Then the disappearances began. A survey team sent into one of the fissures failed to report back. Their signals were cut off abruptly. No distress call, no sign of combat. Just silence. Another group went missing days later. Equipment left behind showed nothing but a sudden blackout, as though a shadow had consumed the cameras. Some claimed the ground itself had swallowed the teams whole. Others whispered of doors opening and closing in the darkness. By the time a third crew vanished, fear had fully taken root. Warship commanders now refused to send any more soldiers below without orders from the highest authority. The council debated endlessly. Some demanded immediate bombardment of the planet, calling it too dangerous to allow anything beneath the ground to awaken. Others argued that destroying it would erase evidence of one of the greatest discoveries in galactic history. The voices rose to shouting, old rivalries between species boiling over as the shadow of humanity fell across their chamber. In the end, they agreed only on one thing: more fleets would be dispatched. If humanity was truly buried beneath the crust, then they would be contained at all costs. But containment was no longer possible. Deep beneath the surface, something stirred. The scientists who stayed on the planet recorded strange power surges from within the metallic structures. Lights flickered in tunnels that had been dark for centuries. The quakes grew sharper, the rhythm unmistakable now, like the beating of war drums echoing from a forgotten battlefield. Some claimed to hear voices carried through the vibrations, faint and distant, speaking a language that no alien translator could identify. Those who had studied the archives did not need a translator. They knew it was English. The panic reached a peak when one of the mining stations collapsed completely into the earth. Witnesses reported seeing the ground open like a mouth, swallowing metal towers and drilling rigs before slamming shut with a sound that rolled across the mountains. Dust filled the skies, communications cut out, and from the heart of the disaster came a deep echo that rattled every bone in those who heard it. It was not an earthquake. It was an awakening. The galaxy had grown used to life without humans. Now it would learn again what it meant when the ground itself trembled in warning. The unearthed secret. The surface of the planet was scarred beyond recognition. Deep fissures stretched for miles, smoke and dust rising from the wounds in the earth like the planet itself was groaning in pain. Entire valleys had shifted, rivers of stone sliding into the blackness below. The warships in orbit watched the devastation unfold with growing unease. Their instruments recorded energy spikes unlike anything in their databases. Power signatures that matched no natural occurrence pulsed from within the crust, timed with every tremor that shook the ground. What unsettled the commanders most was the undeniable pattern. The surges were not chaotic but organized, almost as if a vast machine buried beneath the surface was powering up after centuries of silence. The Council dispatched more specialists to study the phenomenon. Teams of engineers and historians landed on the planet under heavy military escort. They descended into the newly opened fissures, lowering scanners and cameras into the black abyss. What they saw forced them to question everything they had been taught. Metal corridors stretched beneath the earth, massive in scale and untouched by time. Walls gleamed as though recently polished. Bulkheads loomed with locking mechanisms still intact. The deeper they explored, the more it became clear that this was no ruin. It was a facility maintained in perfect condition, as though waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The engineers confirmed what many feared. The structures were not alien in origin. Their design bore every hallmark of human engineering. The alloys matched descriptions preserved in ancient war archives. The markings carved into the walls mirrored symbols once seen on human military vessels. Historians shuddered as they translated fragments, identifying unit numbers and insignias from battalions that were supposed to have perished long ago. This was not a tomb. It was a fortress. Then came the discovery that silenced every argument in the council chamber. Deep within one of the caverns, sealed behind layers of reinforced steel, lay rows of massive pods. Each one was tall enough to contain a living being. Transparent glass revealed figures inside. Pale faces rested in silence, bodies unmoving but perfectly preserved. The scans confirmed life signs faint but steady like embers hidden under ash. These were not corpses. They were humans asleep in cryogenic suspension. The aliens who stood before the pods trembled. Every instinct told them to flee, but curiosity and fear chained them to the spot. The scientists scrambled to analyze the technology. They could not understand how the pods had lasted for centuries without failure. Power flowed seamlessly through conduits that should have decayed long ago. Energy signatures pulsed in harmony with the tremors, suggesting the awakening of the planet was linked to the reactivation of the sleepers. Each time the ground shook, a pod glowed faintly brighter. The realization struck the observers with chilling clarity. The quakes were not geological events. They were the sound of humanity stirring. The first disappearance of a research team now made sense. Security footage recovered from a damaged recorder showed the moment before contact was lost. One of the pods had briefly flickered to life. The camera caught the movement of an eyelid twitching open. A soldier within had begun to awaken, though the footage ended abruptly and static before the outcome could be seen. The council received the recording in silence. No one laughed now. No one dismissed the warnings. Fear gripped them as the truth settled in. Humanity was not extinct. Humanity had hidden itself, waiting in silence beneath the ground until the time to rise again arrived. The commanders debated immediate action. Some demanded orbital bombardment to obliterate the entire site before the pods could open. Others argued that such an act might provoke a response from the very beings they feared. If even one human soldier awoke, the consequences could be catastrophic. The memories of past wars resurfaced in the chamber. Stories of human fleets outnumbered yet victorious. Soldiers who fought until their last breath. Commanders who turned hopeless battles into victories through sheer willpower. To awaken such warriors was to invite the return of nightmares the galaxy had buried. Meanwhile, on the planet, the tremors grew violent. Entire mountains collapsed into the earth. Lights flickered across the underground corridors as dormant systems activated. Alarms blared in languages forgotten by the galaxy. The pods glowed brighter one by one, a sea of silent soldiers ready to rise. In orbit, the warships scrambled, preparing weapons, but every officer knew they were too late. The sound of the ground shaking was no longer just a warning. It was the sound of doors unlocking. The unearthed secret was no longer a secret at all. The galaxy had peered into the abyss and discovered not death but the steady breath of a sleeping giant preparing to open its eyes. The first human awakens, the AI. Silence within the underground fortress was broken by a faint hiss as one of the cryogenic pods released its ancient seal. Vapor poured across the floor, curling around the boots of the alien researchers who stood frozen in shock. They had been told the pods would not open without deliberate interference, yet Here it was happening before their eyes. The glass of the chamber grew clear as the systems inside finished their sequence. A figure shifted within, muscles trembling as if shaking off centuries of cold. Then the eyes opened. They were human eyes, sharp and piercing, filled with confusion yet also with a presence that made every alien nearby step back in fear. The pod door slid open with a metallic groan, and the first human soldier took his first breath of air in hundreds of years. The soldier stumbled forward, his body weak but not broken. His gaze swept the room, studying the creatures that surrounded him. They were not his people. They were alien, strange, and trembling before him. He did not speak their language, but his silence was louder than any word. His presence alone radiated danger. Every movement was measured, controlled, the way a predator sizes up its surroundings before striking. The aliens raised their scanners in fear, but none dared to fire. They knew instinctively that a single wrong move would unleash something they could not contain. The soldier touched the wall beside his pod, his fingers tracing the markings etched into the steel. Memories flickered in his mind. Fragments of orders, faces of comrades, the sound of battlefields filled with fire and smoke. He remembered the war that had driven his people into hiding. He remembered the betrayal of a galaxy united against humanity, determined to erase them. And he remembered the final command that had been given: endure, survive, wait until the time came to rise again. That time had now come. The tremors shook the earth again, stronger than before. Across the cavern, more pods flickered, their lights glowing like stars in the darkness. The soldier looked at them, his expression unreadable, but deep within him a fire was reigniting. He understood what was happening. His brothers and sisters were awakening. The fortress was no longer asleep. It was breathing with life once more. The aliens backed away, broadcasting frantic messages to the fleets in orbit, their words filled with panic. They begged for reinforcements, for instructions, for anything that might save them from what they were witnessing above. The warships received the transmissions and their commanders debated frantically. Some demanded immediate bombardment, insisting that the human presence must be destroyed before it grew. Others argued that the risk was too great, that striking the planet might awaken even more pods or trigger defenses buried in the crust. In their hesitation, the ground below erupted again, and the decision was taken from them. Humanity had already begun to move. The awakened soldier turned his gaze back to the aliens. He raised a hand slowly, not in peace but in warning. The tremor that followed his gesture shook the cavern, cracks splitting across the floor. Lights blazed across the walls as the ancient systems of the fortress surged to full power. Engines buried deep beneath the planet roared to life, sending shockwaves through the crust. The soldier's lips parted and he spoke at last, his words incomprehensible to the aliens but carrying a tone that left no doubt. It was a declaration, a promise that humanity had returned. One of the braver scientists stepped forward, trembling but desperate. He tried to speak, to communicate, to show that they meant no harm. But the soldier's eyes burned with a fire that was not interested in words. He had awoken into a galaxy that had once tried to erase his kind. He knew instinctively that trust was not possible. He turned his back on the aliens and placed his hand on another pod. The glass shimmered and inside another human stirred. The awakening was no longer limited to one. It was spreading. The council, watching through live feeds, fell into chaos. Arguments erupted, old fears resurfacing with terrifying clarity. Some tried to convince themselves that the awakening could be contained, that perhaps only a few soldiers had survived. But as more pods opened, their hopes shattered. Dozens of humans were now standing, shaking off centuries of sleep, their bodies regaining strength with each passing moment. They were not broken by time. They were warriors reborn. Panic spread through the alien ranks on the planet. Some fled toward the surface, abandoning equipment in their haste. Others collapsed in fear, unable to comprehend what they had unleashed. In orbit, the warships prepared weapons, but even their captains hesitated. Every story they had ever heard about humanity warned them that underestimating humans was a fatal mistake. To fire now might spark a retaliation they could not survive. As the first squad of humans gathered around the awakened soldier, a strange unity filled the air. They spoke to each other in low voices, their words lost to the alien observers, but their tone carried strength and discipline. They were soldiers, not frightened refugees. They had awoken into enemy territory and they were preparing for war. The fortress trembled again, and this time the vibrations carried across the entire continent. Mountains shook, rivers split, and valleys collapsed. The awakening was not just of soldiers. Machines buried deep within the earth were stirring, their engines growling like beasts ready to rise. The first human had opened his eyes, and with him the planet itself had begun to roar. The return of the forgotten army. The fortress beneath the ground was no longer silent. Pod after pod hissed open, the sound echoing through the vast chambers like a storm breaking free. Humans stepped forward in steady rhythm, their movements slow at first as they shook off the weight of centuries, then stronger as their muscles remembered what they had once been trained to do. Rows of soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, their eyes adjusting to the dim light, their breathing calm and focused. They did not speak loudly, yet their silence carried a power that filled the entire cavern. To the aliens who watched from the shadows, it felt like standing in the presence of a force that had no equal. The first awakened soldier who had risen looked at his comrades with recognition. Memories returned to him, flashes of battlefields and last stands where humanity had fought against impossible odds. He remembered the retreat into the bunkers, the order to endure until the time was right, the promise that humanity would never die but only sleep until it was ready to rise again. That promise had now been fulfilled. His voice rang out in the old tongue of his people, a rallying call that brought every head up and every heart alive. Though the aliens could not understand the words, they understood the meaning. This was the beginning of something they could not stop. Across the cavern, massive doors began to grind open, revealing stockpiles of weapons sealed away with the soldiers. Rifles gleamed under the glow of reactivated lights. Blades forged for close combat hung in racks untouched by time. Heavy armor stood in perfect condition, polished as if waiting for its owners to return. The humans moved with discipline, taking up their gear as though no centuries had passed. They strapped on armor, tested their rifles, and fell into formation with precision that made the alien observers shiver. This was not a group of survivors stumbling into a new world. This was an army that had been waiting for its war to begin again. The tremors above grew stronger as deeper mechanisms activated. Beneath the fortress, titanic engines roared to life, feeding power into machines buried even further into the crust. Vast doors opened to reveal colossal war machines, armored walkers and tanks designed for destruction. Their systems had been dormant but never dead, waiting only for the awakening of their operators. As the humans approached them, the machines responded, lights flickering on and engines humming with readiness. The aliens could not comprehend the scale of what they were witnessing. It was not just the return of a people. It was the return of an entire military force preserved through time. In orbit, the warships grew restless. Commanders shouted orders, their fear mounting with every transmission from the ground. They had expected perhaps a handful of survivors, weak and broken, not thousands of soldiers and an arsenal of weapons. Some captains urged immediate bombardment, others hesitated, haunted by the warnings of history. Stories of human resilience filled their minds, stories of fleets burned to ash by strategies no one could predict, stories of soldiers who fought until their enemies collapsed from exhaustion. To strike now could awaken the humans fully and provoke retaliation on a scale the galaxy had not seen in centuries. Yet to wait was to allow them to rise unchallenged. The Council sent frantic messages, but unity was gone. Fear had already torn their judgment apart. On the surface, the aliens who had once claimed authority now ran for their lives. Entire mining stations were abandoned. Scientists discarded their equipment in terror. Only a few remained, too fascinated or too paralyzed by fear to leave. They watched as humans marched out of the fortress in tight formation, their boots striking the stone in rhythm with the tremors. The ground itself seemed to echo their march. Dust rose into the air as more doors opened, releasing machines that shook the valleys with every step. The planet was no longer just a mine. It had become a staging ground for the rebirth of humanity. The humans did not speak to their observers, nor did they lash out in immediate violence. Instead, they moved with purpose, ignoring the terrified aliens who cowered in corners. Their focus was on one another, on reawakening their strength, on readying themselves for the battles to come. To the aliens, this indifference was even more terrifying than open hostility. It was the calm of predators who had no doubt of their victory. The soldiers spoke among themselves in words the aliens could not understand, but every tone carried confidence and unity. They were remembering who they were and what they had been created to do. As the day stretched on, the first human banners were raised within the fortress. Flags that had once flown in battles across the stars unfurled again, their symbols burning into the minds of the alien witnesses. These were not relics of the past. They were warnings to the future. The galaxy had believed humanity to be extinct. Now those banners proclaimed to anyone who saw them that the dead had returned. The ground shook with renewed force as the machines of war rolled forward, and the sky above darkened with dust and thunder. The aliens who had once believed themselves the masters of this discovery now understood the truth. They had not found ruins. They had not uncovered bones. They had awoken an army buried in the earth like a seed waiting for the right season to rise. The forgotten had returned, and they were not interested in being forgotten again. The reckoning. The planet trembled as if the very crust remembered the weight of human footsteps. Across the underground fortress, the army had fully awakened. Thousands of soldiers marching in perfect formation, their armor gleaming under the glow of long, dormant lights. War machines that had been sealed for centuries rolled forward, their engines rumbling like the growl of titans. The sound echoed across valleys and mountains, rising up to the skies where alien warships circled nervously. For the aliens on the surface, there was no doubt left. The humans were no longer myths. They were alive, armed, and ready to reclaim what had been taken from them. The first clash came when a squad of alien soldiers attempted to halt the human advance. They had been ordered to block the exits of the fortress, hoping to contain the awakening before it reached the surface. Their weapons glowed as they leveled them toward the humans, voices shaking as they shouted warnings. The humans did not falter. Their leader raised his hand, signaling silence, and the soldiers continued their march with unbroken rhythm. The aliens panicked and fired. Beams of light scorched the air, striking against human armor, but the humans pressed forward without fear. Their formation shifted, shields raised in unison, weapons lifted as one. A single volley thundered from their rifles, the sound sharp and merciless. The alien squad was thrown back in moments, their lines shattered, their confidence destroyed. Those who survived fled into the hills, leaving behind weapons and comrades. For the galaxy, it was the first reminder of what human discipline meant. Once awakened, nothing could stand before it. In orbit, the commanders argued in desperation. Some demanded a full bombardment, convinced that overwhelming firepower was the only chance to end this before it spread beyond the planet. Others warned that striking now would trigger defenses buried deeper still. They pointed to the rising energy readings, signals of vast power sources coming online beneath the crust. The humans had not only preserved soldiers but machines far beyond what anyone could see. To attack recklessly might awaken the full might of their arsenal. Fear gnawed at the commanders until hesitation chained them, and hesitation was all the humans needed. The fortress continued to release its secrets. Massive hangars opened, revealing sleek ships coated in layers of dust that fell away as their systems roared back to life. Engines fired, shaking the earth with each ignition. The humans moved with purpose, fueling the ships, preparing them as though centuries had not passed. Every step they took restored the power of a force that had once terrified the stars. The aliens who had stayed behind to observe now understood the scale of the danger. It was not a handful of warriors returning. It was the rebirth of a civilization that had gone to sleep not in defeat, but in preparation. As the humans poured onto the surface, the landscape transformed. Valleys filled with the thunder of armored vehicles, their cannons swiveling toward the skies. Soldiers marched in perfect lines, their banners flying high above their heads. The air grew thick with dust and smoke as the ground shook under the movement of so many machines. The alien civilians who had lived near the mining sites abandoned their homes, scattering in all directions. From orbit, it looked as though the planet itself was bleeding soldiers, rivers of humanity flowing out of the mountains and across the plains. The galaxy watched in horror as the long, silent race revealed its strength once more. The council chambers erupted in panic. Leaders screamed at one another, each demanding a different course of action. Some wanted negotiations, desperate to avoid the return of war. Others demanded extermination, swearing that if the humans were allowed to rise again, the galaxy would suffer as it once had. But deep down, even the loudest voices knew the truth. Humanity was no longer something they could control with words or weapons. The decision had already been made centuries ago when the soldiers entered their pods. Humanity had chosen survival, and survival meant returning with the strength to claim what was theirs. On the planet, the first human machines turned their cannons toward the skies. The alien warships above locked their weapons in return. The standoff stretched in silence, the whole galaxy holding its breath. The humans made no demand, no plea, no attempt to parley. Their silence was more terrifying than threats. It was the silence of confidence, of certainty that the coming battle was theirs. Then the first shot was fired. A human cannon roared, its blast tearing through the sky and striking the hull of a warship. Fire and debris rained across the heavens as the fleet scrambled to respond. But the humans had already moved. Their ships lifted from the surface, engines screaming, weapons blazing. The reckoning had begun. Across the galaxy, the news spread faster than light. Every channel carried the images of human soldiers marching from the Earth, of alien fleets burning in orbit, of machines that had been buried longer than most empires had existed now, tearing across battlefields with unstoppable force. Worlds that had once mocked the idea of human return now whispered in fear. Old veterans wept, knowing the warnings they had given had come true. Humanity was not extinct. Humanity had never been gone. They had only been waiting for the moment when the galaxy had grown complacent. Now that moment was over, and the reckoning was at hand. Humanity's declaration. The battlefield above the planet blazed with fire. Human ships, long silent in their underground hangars, now soared through the skies with terrifying grace. They moved with precision, their formations tight and their weapons unleashing storms of destruction. Alien warships, though greater in number, faltered under the sheer discipline of their opponents. Every move the humans made was calculated, every shot coordinated, and every strike tore through the enemy lines with brutal efficiency. From the surface, the awakened soldiers watched the battle unfold with calm certainty, knowing their people had never forgotten the art of war. On the ground, the fortress continued to awaken. More soldiers marched into the light, their armor gleaming under the rising sun, their banners flying high. The machines of war rolled across the plains, their tracks carving deep scars into the soil. The very earth seemed to shake in rhythm with their advance. Villages near the mining sites lay abandoned, their alien inhabitants fleeing in terror. To them, it was not simply an army that had risen. It was the return of something older and far more dangerous, a force that had been shaped by centuries of survival on a world that crushed the weak. Humanity had endured extinction itself and now stood once more as predators among the stars. The alien commanders attempted to rally their fleets, sending waves of reinforcements into orbit. Yet every strategy they employed fell apart. The humans anticipated every maneuver, countering with tactics that turned disadvantages into victories. Where the aliens relied on numbers, the humans relied on cunning. Where the aliens sought to overwhelm, the humans struck with precision. Slowly, inevitably, the tide shifted. Alien warships burst into flames one by one, their wreckage scattering across the void. The galaxy watched in horror as the descendants of the most feared warriors in history carved their way back into power. Within the council chamber, chaos reigned. Delegates screamed at one another, demanding action, demanding surrender, demanding anything that might preserve their species. The oldest among them sat in silence, their faces pale with dread. They remembered too clearly what it had meant to face humanity in battle. They had warned that declaring humans extinct was not wisdom but arrogance. Now those warnings returned to haunt them. The galaxy had not destroyed humanity. It had only given them time to prepare. Now they had returned stronger than before back on the planet. As the dust of battle settled and the last alien ground forces retreated, the human leader emerged from the fortress. His armor was scarred from centuries of sleep, yet still shone beneath the light. Dirt clung to his shoulders, but his eyes burned with a fire that silenced all who looked upon him. He walked to the edge of the valley where alien envoys had been dragged in chains, trembling and broken, and stood before them with the weight of history at his back. He raised his voice not only to them but to every channel broadcasting across the stars. His words were carried into every system, into every home, into every mind that had once believed humanity gone. "You thought we were extinct," he said. His tone calm yet thunderous, his language translated instantly into alien tongues. "You thought you had erased us from the galaxy, but we do not die in silence. We endure, we survive. And when the ground shook beneath your feet, it was not the end of the world. It was the sound of our return." The envoys bowed their heads, their bodies trembling. They had no answer, no strength to defy him. Across the galaxy, the broadcast sent shockwaves. Worlds that had once cheered humanity's fall now trembled at their rise. Soldiers who had never faced a human before felt their courage falter. Leaders who had mocked the old stories now realized that the myths were real, and the legends walked once more. The human leader raised a hand and pointed toward the heavens where the remnants of the alien fleet drifted in ruins. "We will not hide again," he continued. "We will not bow. The galaxy tried to bury us, but we are the children of Earth, and we rise from the soil itself. Remember this day, for it is the day humanity returned, and the ground trembled because it knew its masters had awakened." Silence followed, a silence that stretched across the stars. The aliens who had thought themselves rulers now knew they were subjects standing before a force that could not be erased. The humans did not cheer, nor did they celebrate. Their discipline held, their unity unshaken. For them, this was not a victory, but the beginning of a campaign that had been promised long ago. The galaxy would never again know peace without remembering the shadow of humanity. And as their war drums echoed through the soil, one truth became clear. The age of alien dominance was over. The age of mankind had begun again the day the galaxy trembled. The sky above the broken planet glowed red with the fire of battle. Ships burned in orbit, their wreckage falling like meteors across the surface, while the ground itself shook with the march of human machines. From the ancient fortress that had hidden them for centuries, humanity had emerged in full strength. Soldiers in armor stood in endless rows, banners waving, engines roaring as their machines of war carved deep lines through the valleys. What had once been a silent grave of myths was now alive with the thunder of a people who refused to be erased. The galaxy had feared this day, the day when humans would return, and now that day had arrived. Alien survivors hid in the hills, watching in disbelief as their fleets were torn apart and their armies scattered. They had grown up believing humanity was extinct, a story told in schools to warn of arrogance and war. Now they saw the truth with their own eyes. Humanity had not vanished. Humanity had endured, sleeping beneath the ground, waiting with patience that no other species could match. And when they rose as one. Not as survivors, but as warriors who carried the memory of every battle fought and every betrayal endured. The tremors under their feet were not the planet breaking. They were the footsteps of a people who had been forced into silence and now spoke again with fire and steel. The leader of the awakened army stood at the edge of the valley, looking over the alien prisoners brought before him. His armor was scarred, his face marked with the weight of centuries, but his eyes burned with a light that made the envoys tremble. He did not raise his voice in anger, nor did he cry for vengeance. Instead, his words came clear and steady, carried on every channel across the stars. He told the galaxy that they had made one mistake, the mistake of thinking humanity could be erased. He told them that humans were not gone. They were never gone. They were only waiting, and the shaking ground had been their call to rise. He declared that humanity would no longer hide, that they would reclaim their place, and that every world would remember this day as the day the galaxy trembled, not from earthquakes but from the march of mankind. Across distant systems, civilians and soldiers watched the broadcast in silence. Leaders who had laughed at the thought of human survival now trembled in their palaces. Veterans of old wars bowed their heads, whispering prayers or curses, knowing that the warnings they had given were true. Children who had been told humans were only stories now looked to the stars with fear, for the stories had come alive, and the legends walked again. The galaxy had been built on the belief that humanity was gone forever. That foundation had cracked, and from the cracks rose an army unlike any other. The human leader lowered his gaze and raised his hand to his soldiers. With one movement, the entire army shifted into perfect formation, their banners snapping in the wind, their machines standing ready behind them. It was not a display of pride, but of promise. They would not be broken again. They would not be buried again. The ground shook under their discipline, a living heartbeat that carried across the plains. It was not the end of their awakening. It was only the beginning, and in that moment, the galaxy understood that its age had changed forever. The silence of humanity had ended. The roar of their return had begun the end.